If you've ever wondered the difference between natural cocoa powder or regular cocoa powder and Dutch processed cocoa powder, I have totally got you covered today. My name is Tessa and I'm from HandleTheHeat.com, where I love to share homemade baking recipes, tips and tricks, and articles about the science behind baking. And if you are a big chocoholic like I am, then you probably find yourself using cocoa powder quite often in your own kitchen. And you've probably wondered, what exactly is the difference between natural and Dutch processed cocoa powder? Can you substitute one for the other? Why do they look so different? And why is it so much harder to find Dutch processed cocoa powder? I know it can be totally confusing that there are two different types of cocoa powder, but they really are different from one another, and I'm going to be showing you exactly how. If you want to improve your baking forever, then be sure to watch this video all the way to the end, because there are some good baking science lessons and nuggets in here that I think you'll love. Okay, so let's start with natural cocoa powder. It's what's most commonly found in most American supermarkets and American recipes for things like cake or brownies. Natural cocoa powder is medium brown and bitter in flavor. Due to the fact that natural cocoa powder is actually highly acidic, it's often paired with baking soda. Baking soda is a leavener, and since it's a natural alkaline ingredient, baking soda will actually help to neutralize the acidity in natural cocoa powder. On the other hand, Dutch processed cocoa powder is more commonly found in Europe and has a few distinct characteristics that set it apart from natural cocoa powder. If you're wondering how you can figure out whether a cocoa powder is natural or if it's Dutch processed, take a careful look at the label. If it's Dutch processed, it'll either say that directly or it'll have something along the line of cocoa processed with alkali on the packaging, which means basically that it's Dutch processed. Opposed to natural cocoa powder, Dutch processed cocoa powder is only slightly acidic because it's been put through that process where it's treated with alkali, which neutralizes the acidity. This alkalizing process also helps to soften the flavor of the cocoa powder. What's probably most immediately noticeable about the differences between natural and Dutch processed cocoa powder is that Dutch processed cocoa powder has a really intense, more bold, reddish, deep color to it. However, what's important to know is that color is not always an indication of quality when it comes to cocoa powder. In fact, and this is a little interesting tidbit for you, Oreo cookies are made with cocoa powder that's highly Dutched. Sometimes it's even also called black cocoa, and it has little to no chocolate flavor in it. So whereas natural cocoa powder is often paired with baking soda to help neutralize the acidity, since Dutch processed cocoa powder has already had its acidity neutralized, it's often paired with baking powder instead. The other important thing to note is that Dutch processed cocoa powder actually won't react to baking soda, meaning if you pair the two together in a recipe without any other acid, such as brown sugar or lemon or yogurt, then you won't get much leavening effect. And I actually have an entire video describing the differences between baking powder and baking soda, and I'll link to that below. So while the two cocoa powders are different from one another and they act differently on a chemical level in the recipes that you're using, one isn't necessarily better than the other. If there is no baking powder or baking soda called for in the recipe, then you can go ahead and use the two different types of cocoa powder interchangeably. You might get a slightly different flavor from what the original recipe called for, but you can basically use them interchangeably if there's no baking soda or baking powder. However, if there is a specific leavening agent called for in the recipe, then your best bet is to stick with the exact type of cocoa powder that's called for. And while Dutch processed cocoa powder can be a bit more difficult to find, I've noticed that it's become increasingly common in grocery stores. I see it at Super Target all the time. If you can't find it there, you can go to a gourmet food store like Williams-Sonoma, or you can just order it online. I actually order, since I bake all the time obviously, I order a giant tub of Dutch processed cocoa powder from Amazon, and it's an excellent value. So when there is a specific leavening agent called for in a recipe, I always recommend sticking to the cocoa powder that's specified. However, I know that's not always an option. But the rule here is if there's more than 3/4 of a cup of cocoa powder and there's a specific leavening agent called for, you have to stick to the cocoa powder that's specified in the recipe. Otherwise, you really risk ruining the entire recipe, having a really less than stellar texture and taste, and completely wasting your time and ingredients. So to avoid that, I always recommend to just follow the recipe as it's written. Generally, you will have more success substituting natural cocoa powder for Dutch processed cocoa powder, but not the other way around. I know it can all get a little bit confusing. I hope this video shed some light on the differences between these two cocoa powders, and if anything, I hope it taught you that baking truly is a science, and to get the best results, we have to be accurate and precise and follow the recipe as it's written. Or unless you have a better understanding of how things work, you can kind of experiment and play around some more. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see next time, and be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you around soon.